Hello, everyone. This is the 253rd episode of Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I interview English football fans Mr. Ant Mulligan, Mr. Joni Avery, and Mr. Paul Salmon as we discuss Blackburn Rovers during the decade of the 1990s. Welcome to all of you.
Welcome. Hello.
Morning.
So, can you please introduce yourselves and your trajectory into football?
I'll start, yeah, no worries. So, obviously, myself, it runs in the family in the way. My great granddad won three FA Cups with Blackburn in the 1880s. We're getting an honour cap next week at Portsmouth game. Sad bit of season to get older for 39 year now at Ewood Park. I do events for previous Rovers legends while raising money for a really good charity. But yeah, I go home and away every game and hopefully get to see the good times again soon.
Cheers. I'm Paul. I'm 45. I think I went to my first Rovers game when I was 3. Had a season ticket for something like 35 years or so. Yeah, that's me.
I'm Ant, 80s kid, grew up in Rishton, been a Rovers fan all my life, played football all my life. That's about it, really, yeah. Seen the bad times, the good times, and now in the bad times again. But I think, once you're a Rovers fan, you'll never forget that first time where you step out at Ewood Park and see the green grass and you fall in love with it, and that's it, you're done. You hope for life. So, yeah.
That's the one, mate. That's the one.
Well, let's go back in time. Can you summarize the history of Blackburn Rovers and their status in English football as we come to the late 80s, early 1990?
We started in 1875. It's our 150th year anniversary this season. We won 6 FA Cups, won a full Members' Cup, a League Cup, and we won the league a couple of times, 1928 and 1994-95 season. So we have got a decent history there, Blackburn.
I'd go as far as to say the history's unrivaled, to be honest. As Johnny said, 1875, one of the oldest football clubs in the whole world. Blackburn, as a town, was really instrumental in the formation of the game of football as we know it. One of the first professional footballers ever was Fergus Suter, who was, for anyone who's seen the Netflix series, The English Game, that was based upon his time at the club. It was a real football town. There wasn't just Blackburn Rovers, but there was Blackburn Olympic as well. In the very early stages of the game, we were really, really strong in terms of the formation. Won 3 FA Cups in a row, which is an unmatched feat. Hasn't been replicated since. That was in the 1880s. I think we're still the 10th most decorated club in English football, despite being a relatively small town team, and we're the only club in English football to have won a major trophy in 3 different centuries. So the pedigree is really, really strong. As you get into the 90s, it's hard to say, but it's probably true that the best years were behind us. We were a well-known, proud club. I think everybody in world football knew Blackburn Rovers. The names, there's not many Rovers around, and we are the Rovers. The football kit is pretty unique. The blue and white halves. Anywhere you go in the world, you see those blue and white halves, and you instantly know it's Blackburn Rovers. But yeah, we were a little bit of a spent force. The game had moved on. As I say, we were a small town. The big city clubs had come to the fore. So that's probably how we found ourselves in the 90s, really.
Like it's been mentioned, we've obviously been established in the 1800s, in 1875, and as a town, Blackburn was one of the major towns in the world for the textile industry. It's a mill town. It was once known as the capital of the cotton world, which sounds a bit, now, but back then you can imagine the prosperity around the town, the buzz, a massive town in global trade. You've got the Leeds-Liverpool Canal running through it, which was a major transport link out to Liverpool and out to the rest of the world. And you had Blackburn Rovers right at the heart of it. So that would, the men in the town would have been working long hours all week, going to watch the Rovers on a Saturday. And as has been mentioned, we're one of the founder members of the Football League, and later on one of the founder members of the Premier League. So pedigree clubs, massive. And everywhere you go, people know us. You see the blue and white halves wherever you go around the world. You'll see us. Mention you're a Rovers fan, and everyone's always got something to say about it. So yeah,
I think early on in the the existence of Atletico Madrid and Atletico Bilbao. I think there's something where Blackburn lent them the blue and white halves for a game or two, whatever. And I think an anniversary of Atletico Madrid just recently gone the last couple of years, and they brought a blue and white kit out for their anniversary kit. So I think that shows how big Blackburn is, really.
Yeah, I've been to the Bilbao Museum actually, and there's a little piece about Rovers, and I think they were buying our own kits basically. But yeah, the blue and white horse is globally iconic, isn't it? And there's quite a number of clubs that have paid homage to it and worn it. So yeah, so we've got a strong history.
So let's discuss the man who changed the team's fortunes, Mr. Jack Walker. What was his background and his connection to the club? And was he vocal about making the club a force in England and even perhaps in Europe?
In terms of his background, I mean, he was one of us, wasn't he? He was a Blackburn man, an ordinary fan in many respects, but he just happened to have hundreds of millions of pounds in the bank, self-made man through the steel industry. But he was just a fan, and I think that's a really key point. There's a lot of talk about ownership in football these days, but he was a fan, and that was part of the fairy tale. But yeah, he was very vocal. There's well-known video footage and quotes of him saying, "I want to make this the finest club in the land," and for a time he did.
It all started like the late 80s, weren't it? And he lent Blackburn the money to get the steel work for Walker Steel for the Riverside stand. And in that, there was a bit of a compensation where he funded the money for Aussie idealist Steve Archibald from Barcelona. So I think he started it really back in 88, I think. And then obviously he bought the club. Well, he came like the main man in 91. January 91, I think it were. And I think looking at the transfer window in 91, I think it kind of shows that he was in charge then.
For me, it shows his strategy as a businessman. He always came across, and he was a lovely guy, weren't he, Jack Walker?
Yeah, he was.
Uncle Jack was his nickname. A real nice, down-to-earth fella. But behind all that, there was a strategy. There was a ruthless businessman. I think that lending Rovers the money in the late 80s was probably part of his strategy to increase his influence at the club and eventually take over one day. Because, you can't just force your way into a club. You've got to increase your influence, and that's what he did. As a businessman, his dad started a sheet metal company, and he died when Jack Walker was in his 20s, I think. So he was a young man getting into business, and he transformed that metal business.
Steel in 51, I think it was.
Right. He's took over that in his early 20s and taken it from what started out as a backstreet sheet metal company and turned it into a company that eventually sold to British Steel for 300 million quid or more.
It was the largest private sale in history in Britain at the time, wasn't it?
Something to do with Jersey Airline as well, weren't they?
Yeah, well, which became Flybe. He was instrumental in that. What eventually became Flybe as well. So as a nice fella, down to earth, but in the background there, you've got a ruthless businessman, perfect for us. Rovers through and through, ruthless businessman, gets things done, self-made. What more do you want? Perfect.
Yeah, success was in his DNA, wasn't it? And you look back now at that team and as successful as we were on the pitch. I mean, for me, Jack Walker was the 12th man. He really was. I think he was a key component of that, not just from the money point of view, but I think the lift he gave the place, he was an inspiration. He was basically a textbook owner of, what you would want the owner of a football club to be.
You go back to what you said, Paul, about his mission statement about making us the best club in the world and all this, but he also branded Manchester United. He's going to make them look cheap. Remember that? That was a very well known statement, what he said. Obviously,
And officially, he was senior vice president while Robert Corr was the club chairman. Though it was obvious that Jack Walker was always the power behind the club. Was it self-evident? How did this dynamic work?
It's a really good question. I think again, it highlights what a good owner Jack Walker was. There was a couple of reasons behind that. For financial reasons, Jack was a tax exile and lived in Jersey. So he wasn't around to be involved in the day-to-day running of the club. But he was also smart enough to realise that it probably wasn't his place to do that. So Rob Core was running things on a day-to-day basis. That wasn't ever what Jack was about. Jack was an absolute talisman. He fronted the money, but he let the management of the club get on with it, whether it was Dalglish or whether it was Rob Core. He didn't interfere. And again, we go back to modern owners of football clubs and, their role in things. Jack just did everything right. He did all the right things and did none of the wrong things. He was there to inspire and to put the money up, but he didn't get involved where he shouldn't. He knew what he was good at and he did it.
Let's discuss the hiring of Kenny Dalglish in October 1991. He had resigned months before from Liverpool as the pressure was too much on him. How was he enticed to manage a then second division side?
Jack Walker again, won't it, guys?
And money talks, doesn't it?
Well, it will, but you can imagine Jack Walker. He had a way about him, and
Yeah.
like I just said, a lovely guy on the face of it, a lovely, true gentleman, but behind that, a ruthless businessman with a clear plan. And
Yeah,
I don't think if you're Kenny Dalglish, Liverpool's quite local to Blackburn, so he's not got far to move. He's got a project. He's got an owner like Jack Walker that's going to back him. You'd meet Jack Walker, you'd run through brick walls for him.
yeah.
And I don't think anybody could have met Jack Walker back then and turned him down. Yes, the money would have been there, of course it would.
Yeah.
But I don't think anyone would have met him and turned him down and not bought into that vision that he had for the club.
I think what made Jack's decision to bring Kenny in was Don Mackay, who was in charge at the time at Rovers. I think when this money was put on the table for him to use to try and make Blackburn stronger, I think there was a bid gone in for Lineker and it was laughed at. Then a bid went in for Newell and Newell rejected the move at first. So I think that's when Jack thought, I need someone who's going to have the pulling power to get the players in. Who do I go and get? And I said Kenny was available and he got his man. So
Yeah, I mean, Kenny Dalglish was, a success all of his career, and Jack Walker was a success all of his career. And I think these sort of people can sense each other and they can read each other. And I think each of them knew that it was the right move. I think as well, the game's changed a lot, and there's a lot more cash in the game, and there's a lot of people who try to be or want to be Jack Walker these days. But we were in not a unique position. I mean, a lot was made of the money we had. There wasn't just Blackburn Rovers with money in those days, but it was a pretty special proposition. I think, it will be different now. It was unique at the time, so I think it was too good to turn down.
absolutely.
What was the backbone of the team at Dalglish's disposal upon taking over? And what were the significant changes he made early on?
Obviously, when Dalglish came in, obviously Blackburn, I would say they didn't have the biggest squad at the time, but they were still being competitive. Obviously, Liverpool in the FA Cup and things like that. And I think then when Dalglish came in, I think Alan Wright was his first one, which covered the left back, and I think covered an aging Chris Sully at the time. Colin Henry was brought in. Mike Newell then was brought in as the first £1 million player that Blackburn bought, and I think the first £1 million player out the top tier of English football. Gordon Cowans for experience, Chris Price for experience, Sherwood, who was a young player at Norwich, they brought him in, and then obviously Newell got injured, and I think they bought Roy Wegerle and Duncan Shearer to try and cover him, but obviously we went on a bit of a downward spiral towards the end of the season due to Newell being injured.
When Dalglish came in, I mean, there was a core of a decent side there.
Yeah.
Bobby Mims was the goalkeeper who went on to play in the Premier League, and again, I don't think Bobby Mims always necessarily gets the respect that he deserves as a keeper. He didn't have a golden glove in those days, but I think he kept the most clean sheets in the Premiership in his first season.
Yeah.
Kevin Moran, well-respected international Republic of Ireland centre defender, was on the scene. Mark Atkins was with the club, who went on to win a Premier League medal. Jason Wilcox was sort of breaking through, wasn't he? Scott Sellers, Simon Garner. Yeah, so, there's some players that went on the journey with Dalglish. Obviously, there was a lot of changes, as Johnny said, a hell of a lot of changes. I was just looking up some of the transfers earlier this week, and I think in the space of a week, I think Mike Newell, Colin Hendry and Gordon Cowans came in, and it was just an incredible time. These were really serious acquisitions. It was just, so it was just building on a decent squad in the first place. We'd always come close to Rovers. We were kind of nearly men, weren't we? It wasn't the case that we'd come from nowhere and all of a sudden Jack came along and we were on the scene. We missed out on promotions to the top league a couple of times and have been very unlucky. So we just needed that little nudge. I mean, we got more than a nudge in a way. We got a huge push over the line with Jack coming along. But I like to think at some point we would have had a go at getting up to the top flight anyway. But it was an incredible time, wasn't it?
Blackburn Rovers were promoted at the end of that season, 1991-92, via the playoffs. So, what was the outlook at this point, naturally prior to the signing of Alan Shearer?
I think towards the end of that season where we went up in the playoffs, we started to falter massively, didn't we? We lost our last like 5-6 games, apart from the last day of the season, and just crept into the playoffs. And then in the playoffs, I mean, we went through the semi-finals against Derby in the end quite comfortably, but it wasn't an easy ride, was it? It was. No. We were 2-0 down pretty quick in the first leg. Then the final at Wembley, we won it. We won it by a penalty, 1-0. It wasn't easy, and I think you're looking at it with two sides, really. You've sort of crept in through the back door, so to speak, but it's the first Premier League season, so the excitement around football in England at the time was massive. On the other hand, you're looking at it with optimistic eyes, thinking we could do well here. You're looking at the players that we're signing, looking at Dalglish, you're thinking, hang on a minute, we could be in the mix here. And I think early doors, we were touted as being one to watch, not perhaps putting in a title charge, but one to watch. Early doors, we were being touted as, like when you see sides come up nowadays, the favourites to go down. We certainly weren't favourites to go down, but no. Yeah.
It's easy with hindsight, isn't it? Because it's obviously very subjective, we'll all have different views, but I remember at the time we were on a journey, weren't we? And nobody knew where that journey was going to go. I mean, there was hope and expectation, and looking back, yeah, we went on to win it, but, I think that's the point with everyone talks about the money we had. There was no guarantees. There was other clubs that spent money as well. It didn't guarantee anything. And personally, I just remember thinking, wow, we're going to be playing some really big clubs. And it was just a really exciting time. I think there's a lot of hope, but again, no guarantees, no real expectation. Not for me anyway. It was just an unbelievable journey. And we were just on a roller coaster and we went with it, basically.
In this off-season of 1992, Walker and Dalglish made a statement of purpose by signing the in-demand young England striker Alan Shearer with a hefty sum. It has to be said that it was not self-evident that Blackburn would be a force right off the bat in this new Premier League. So this was a gamble for Shearer as well. But in any case, was this the reference point in taking the club to the next stage?
It was a statement signing, obviously. It was a British record transfer. But again, yeah, it was a gamble for Shearer. And it goes back to the early point that, there were no guarantees. People talk about the money we had and finances in football, but a lot of clubs have tried to spend big money on players and not succeeded. It was a gamble for Rovers because as good as Shearer was, he was sort of unproven. He scored goals in the top flight and I think he just made his England debut, but it was still, a big transfer. But again, when I think about it, it goes back to the same point as with Dalglish and Jack Walker. Shearer's a success and Jack Walker's a success and Kenny Dalglish was a success. I think these people can sense it in others. So it was a gamble, but obviously it paid off because he was phenomenal.
I also think when he first arrived, talking to some of the players that played with Alan, they said when he first joined the club and in training, it was like, oh my God, what have we spent all this money for? Why have we spent all this money on this player? He's useless in training. And he wasn't really a trainer, they were saying, but I think...
definitely question marks, wasn't there? Because we let David Speedy go in a swap deal.
David Speedy going the other way.
A lot of goals. And then... Before, so yeah, there was definitely question marks at the time, as good as he was.
I think the 2 goals at Palace kind of put that to
very
bed.
Quickly. Yeah, very quickly turn it around.
Well, I hear what you're saying, Paul. What you're going to see now is 2 Rovers fans disagreeing with each other, which isn't new, because there's a lot of disagreements. But I don't think it was a gamble for Shearer, right? I think it was a gamble for Rovers to spend that amount of money on a player that was young. And I know he'd played for England already and scored on his debut, but he'd scored 20-odd goals in over 100 appearances for Southampton, over 4 years. So he wasn't a goal machine. We weren't buying a ready-made goal machine here. So it was. I think the gamble was on the Rovers, really. I think it was a big move for Shearer. Coming to work with Kenny Dalglish, again, the plan that was being put together by Jack Walker, I think it was a really good move for him. And yeah, I think the gamble was all ours, really. We weren't signing a ready-made goal machine. There was a lot of work to be done with him. And I think working with Kenny Dalglish, 2 forwards working together, I think that made Alan Shearer. And I think we can take a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you know what? There's a theme there with Rovers because, again, a lot's made of the money we spent, but there's not many occasions where we actually bought the finished product. You know, a lot of people, I know a lot of the clubs were interested in Shearer, but generally we weren't going out and buying the player that everybody wanted. Shearer was possibly a little bit of an exception, and Tim Flowers and Chris Sutton maybe, but you know, generally Rob was always invested in potential, didn't they? They bought players you hadn't heard of or up and coming players. So yeah, it was just, again, smart gamble. It was smart because history speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Let's look at this first season back at the top in the new Premier League, the 1992-93 season, that resulted in a surprising fourth place for the newly promoted side. So apart from Alan Shearer, you have Roy Wegerle, the American striker coming from Queen's Park Rangers, Stuart Ripley arrived from Middlesbrough, Lee McKell arrived from Newcastle, Swedish defender Patrick Anderson arrived from Malmo. And later on, you have a Norwegian defender Henning Berg arriving, as well as later in the season, towards the tail end of the season, you have the Scottish striker Kevin Gallagher from Coventry and English international defender Graham Lasaw from Chelsea. It's a total turnover as you have the likes of David Speedy, Duncan Shearer, Scott Sellers, Howard Gale, Simon Garner also being offloaded, Chris Price, among others. Even Roy Wegerle himself towards the end of the season, he's his exchange with Kevin Gallagher with Coventry.
Yeah.
So it's like a wholesale team changes. The team finishes fourth that I don't think many would have imagined at the beginning of the season. So it's a surprise all in all for a newly promoted side to do so well. Was it all about Alan Shearer?
Not really, because Boxing Day '92, don't think Shearer did his ligaments, didn't he? His knee. So then we had we had half a season with him, then half a season without him. That's when Gallagher obviously come in from Coventry and stuff. And so no, I don't think it was all down to Alan, really. I think Mike
He played a
Newell's
huge part, didn't he? You're absolutely right. It wasn't all about him. He played a huge part. But, you know,
the beginning, establishing us, as I think his goals at the start, obviously the big game against Norwich, we won 7-1. I think it kind of put Blackburn's name out there that was proper contenders. But then obviously Boxing Day, and obviously Shearer, he did his ligament and carried on the game, didn't he, till the end, scoring 2 goals and then out for the season.
Yeah, I'll make a controversial statement or not, and it's the sort of thing that people who are seeing this will probably think I'm talking nonsense, but I'd even put it forward that if Shearer had remained fit for that whole season,
Yeah,
we could have quite easily won the title, and we could have even done the treble. We got to the League Cup semi-finals, the FA Cup quarter-finals, and football's football. You don't win every game just because of one player. But and in Shearer's absence, the likes of Mike Newell and Kevin Gallagher and others stepped up really well. So it's not as simple as put Shearer back in and we would have won everything. But we probably would have finished further up than fourth, and we could have ended up with 1, 2, or 3 trophies. And Manchester United fans won't like that, but I think we could have done that. Just to go back to another point, you talk about some wholesale changes. I think there was some significant changes to the squad. But if you actually look at that team that we went up with and started the Premier League with, and this is really kind of important to the fairy tale of Blackburn Rovers, you know, the real story is that, yeah, we brought Shearer in, record sign, it's difficult to argue with that. And Stuart Ripley came in as well, albeit he came in from promoted Middlesbrough, so he wasn't a Premier League player before he joined us. But the core of that team that we went up with and finished fourth with was the team from the division below. So Bobby Mims, Mark Atkins, Colin Hendry, Tim Sherwood, Jason Wilcox, Mike Newell, you know, that was a team that there's a lot talks about as buying success, but it was an evolving team. It wasn't just throwing cash at it. Yeah, there were squad players came in, but that was the real greatness of what we did. We grew a side, and it's not a popular opinion that, because I think a lot of fans look on us jealously and say we bought the league or we bought success, but I think there's a different story.
100%. Totally agree with that.
I do too.
Definitely. That season as well, we were like playing against sides that we'd not played against for a long time and beating them. Arsenal's, Tottenham's, Chelsea's, Liverpool's. We were beating them, and comfortably as well at times.
Comfortably. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was incredible, wasn't it? I mean, we mentioned when Gallagher and Lasaw came in that their debuts were against Liverpool at Ewood, and that was, you know, our first season playing Liverpool at Ewood in the league. Was incredible, wasn't it? And we beat them 4-1. And we absolutely took them apart. We took sides apart for fun. It was just, as much as there was the money and there was a degree of expectation and a vision to try and become this great club, it was still incredible. We were pinching ourselves, weren't we? I think our first game at Ewood was against Arsenal, and Arsenal, you know, won the title a couple of years previously. That was a big side. And again, it was 1-0, but we put them to bed, didn't we? And I always remember Stuart Ripley. We talk about Shearer, but Ripley made his home debut, and it was one of the best performances I've seen in a Rovers shirt. He was absolutely incredible. So, it wasn't just Shearer.
Wilcox came in that season as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
I don't know if Wilcox got a mention with them transfers, but he came through the ranks that season.
Yeah.
And with obviously Shearer's record speaks for itself, but you've got Ripley and Wilcox supplying the ammunition, Sherwood from behind him, and so it's more than just Shearer.
It wasn't just that as well. They were building for the future as well. I know they didn't work out, but obviously Lee McKell was supposed to be the next Gascoigne, and I think there was also Wayne Burnett and Frank Talley, Simon Ireland. There was all players that were going to be the next big things. Obviously, it didn't work out for them, but they was also trying to build for the future as well. Patrick Anderson was only 20 when he signed. He ended up having a career with Borussia Mönchengladbach and Barcelona, didn't he? So it just wasn't about buying the biggest and best players. It was also, I think it was like a big business design as well.
It wasn't fantasy football, was it? I mean, and that team was built for Shearer to score goals. I mean, again, we talk about, was it just Shearer? And Shearer's said so many times, but, the likes of Wilcox and Ripley, we played a solid 4-4-2 with out-and-out wingers, Wilcox and Ripley putting the ball in the box. The guys in the middle, likes of Cowans, Atkins, Sherwood, etc. It was all built around forwards scoring goals. So it was a real team. It wasn't 10 average players and one superstar up front and, carrying the rest of them. It was, and that was Dalglish's vision, wasn't it? That was a genius of what he did, because, there was an open checkbook, but it wasn't just as simple as buying anybody, because we could have bought anybody and we didn't.
Let's look at the second season of Premier League, 1993-94, where Blackburn pushed an impressive Manchester United in the second half of the season, with Alan Shearer firmly established as one of the best strikers in Europe, and Blackburn Rovers finish as runners-up. So you have Patrick Anderson leaving, joining Borussia Mönchengladbach, but you have the likes of Paul Warhurst from Sheffield Wednesday. You have Chelsea defender Ian Pearce coming aboard, as well as key signings of internationals David Batty from Leeds United and international goalkeeper Tim Flowers from Southampton later in the season. And this is the season where also Stuart Ripley earned a cap in that infamous match against San Marino. Manchester United, they look like likely winners throughout the season, but in that tail end of the season, Blackburn really pushed them, and there's that famous 2-0 win with Alan Shearer scoring twice. This was it in April? It was really in the tail end of the season, I believe. And that really,
April,
that really made the league race exciting at that point.
Man United were a very, very good side, and in that second season, we're probably deserved winners. However, if that season had gone on for another 10 games, it would have been interesting to see where we ended up. We probably ran out of a little bit of steam, and in the end, they won it by a few points clear, but they were seriously rattled at that point. I think that second season was the first time, I think, the likes of United were sitting up and thinking, these boys are going to trouble us. We really started making an impact. People like David Batty came in, as you mentioned, and Tim Flowers. We were bringing in real pedigree footballers at this point to build on, the existing team, which still had a lot of players from the second division that got promoted. It's important to remember that. But United were rattled, and I remember that 2-0 win, as we probably all do really clearly. They were seriously looking over their shoulders at that point.
We didn't sign loads of players that season, did we? The main transfer work had been done the year before. And in that season, we obviously signed Batty and Timmy Flowers. And two good additions, I think, Warhurst and Pearce. You had versatility from him, didn't you?
Yeah. Unfortunately, Warhurst got injured, didn't he?
He did, yeah.
Yeah.
He absolutely ripped us apart, didn't he, with Sheffield Wednesday? Sheffield Wednesday come to Ewood and Peters, and Warhurst ripped us apart. And I think Leach thought, I'll fancy a bit of that. But not forgetting as well, Alan Shearer was injured for the first 2 months of that season as well, still scored over 30 goals. So, again, we can say, if we had them 2 months of Shearer, would there have been that maybe...
Who knows what would have happened, yeah.
Exactly. So that's another season where we possibly could have made headlines.
Yeah. Yeah, in that season, we weren't massive in the transfer market. We obviously managed to finish second, and it was at the end of the season there. We've always remember Ian Pearce's goal midweek, weren't it, under the floodlights away at West Ham.
Yeah.
And we beat him 2-1. Ian Pearce scored the winner that night, didn't he? And that obviously gets us into Europe for the first time.
Yeah.
So yeah, what a season. And I think it was at that point, you mentioned, Sean, you mentioned the game at Ewood against Man United. I don't know about Johnny and Paul, but That I absolutely love that game. It's etched in my memory. The goals, the commentary. I can still hear Martin Tyler.
Yeah,
I can still see Kenny Dalglish punching as we go 2-0 up. It's
one of the best.
That's the day I started to believe that we were good enough to win the league.
One of
You
the
know
best.
what I mean? Maybe not that season, but at that point, I thought, here we go. We're the real deal. And if it ends this season, next season.
After 40 years of following the Rovers, that has to be up there with one of the best games I've ever been to in my life.
Yeah, unbelievable.
We've gone for like these plucky upstarts from the division below, this small town that people weren't too sure about. I think at that point we were serious contenders, weren't we? And everyone had sat up and took notice. And you probably remember as well, but, I think from that game, it was in the backdrop of the half-built stadium, wasn't it? I sort of remember that the Jack Walker stand wasn't there, was it? And again, that's kind of symbolic, isn't it? It wasn't just happening on the pitch. It was happening off the pitch, and this amazing new stadium was being put up, and it was just an absolute fairy tale. It was such a great time.
Well, let's discuss the title-winning season of 1994-95. And we have the record signing of Chris Sutton from Norwich to complement Alan Shearer in the strike force, and they would form the SAS. Of course, Blackburn would participate in Europe for the first time, though they would be eliminated in the first round to a little-known Swedish side, Trelleborg.
Yeah, let's not talk about that one.
No, we don't.
So as far as transfer, we have David May joining Manchester United, and towards the tail end of the season, Dalglish's first signing, Alan Wright-Jones, Aston Villa. But obviously, it's all about Chris Sutton's signing. That again was a gamble, and Alan Sugar had stated that he would not spend so much money on a non-established player. So it just shows, I guess, the confidence that Dalglish and Jack Walker had on Chris Sutton. You also have the Australian Robbie Slater arriving, as well as West Ham veteran Tony Gale. And towards the tail end of the season, you have the Irish defender Jeff Kenna arriving from Southampton, and Dutch midfielder Richard Witske came on loan from French side Bordeaux. And we should mention that David Batty also missed just about all of that season.
Yeah.
I think he played maybe 4 matches, I think. And he famously refused a medal because he felt he had not earned it. And Mark Atkins replaced him in the lineup. As far as Chris Sutton and Alan Shearer, they scored regularly throughout the season, but in the second half of the season, I think Chris Sutton somewhat scored less than he did in the first half of the season, and Jason Wilcox missed the last 10 or so matches of the season, and the form somewhat dipped in the end. You have that loss at home against Manchester City, as it looked like Blackburn were going to run away with a title. There's some points that dropped here and there. It all comes down to that final day against Liverpool, while at the same time Manchester United is playing West Ham United. And of course, we know what happens. Despite losing in the was it in the last minute that Liverpool scored? I'm trying to remember.
It was Anfield as well.
Though they lose, Manchester United can only earn a tie at West Ham, and Blackburn Rovers win the Premier League title in such a dramatic fashion.
It's a draw in England, Shahan. It's not a tie, it's a draw.
Sorry.
So yeah, West Ham obviously drew with Man United, which meant that we'd won the league. And as Johnny says, we weren't at home. It was at Anfield. But again, you've listed off the transfers there. With Jeff Kenner coming in later in the season, that was partly due to Wilcox obviously getting injured and missing the latter stage of the season. That allowed us to push Graham Lasalle higher up the pitch and cover fullback positions. But signing Chris Sutton, £5 million, was it a gamble? Alan Sugar's a switched on guy, but at the end of the day, he's signed for £5 million. He's been a big contribution towards us winning the league. Then we sold him for £10 million. So good investment. Again, Jack Walker showing why he is who he is. Tony Gale comes in, Robbie Slater. I really liked Robbie Slater. I mean, Ripley was, for me, one of the best right wingers that I've ever seen play, really. But bringing Robbie Slater in was still a good player. So again, not a massive summer in terms of transfer activity. One major signing, couple of others brought in just to, add them missing pieces to the jigsaw. But look, we were the best team in the league. We were the best team in the league by a distance. We've ended up with the manager of the year, the players' player of the year, 6 players in the team of the year, I think it was. We were the best team in the league. We won it on the last day of the season. We should have had it put to bed earlier than that. But I'll always go back to them 2 games against United during that season. One at Ewood, we're 1-0 up, Berg gets sent off, Cantona converts the penalty, it's 1-1. And then we're obviously up against
Terrible decision, wasn't it?
Terrible decision.
Yeah.
That was that was just robbery. And then we had the away fixture where we equalised late on.
Shearer.
And that gets chalked off. And at the time, I think, United were massive in the football establishment. Rovers were seen as like, the pretenders. And everybody kind of felt a little bit like United had just got the referees on the side. And I think it felt like that for years, didn't it, guys? And I think we were victims of that to a certain extent, but we didn't let it bother us. We went on, won the league. Like I said, we were the best side. Manager of the year, player of the year, 6 players in the team of the year, top scorer in the league. What else can you do if you can't do that? And we won it fair and square. Yeah.
Also, going back to what you said as well regarding Batty, when Batty got injured, they could have just gone out and bought one of the best midfielders, but they didn't. They put their, the thing in Atkins, and Atkins just turned out to be a hell of a season.
It was a genius of Dalglish, wasn't it?
Yeah. Genius Dalglish putting him in midfield. The engine he had on him is absolutely incredible.
Yeah, he's an unsung hero for me, Mark Atkins, and he's the antithesis, isn't he, to this kind of moneybags Rovers who just threw cash at everything. We're talking about a right back from Scunthorpe for 45 grand in 1988, winning the Premier League, alongside Tim Sherwood. I mean, I love what Mark Atkins represented about that side. But when you mentioned a couple of those players, we talk about people like Robbie Slater and Tony Gale. Again, this is the genius of Kenny Dalglish, in my view. And again, it really puts a blow in against these comments that we just threw cash at it. Tony Gale was 35 years old, was he? I think he was training with Barnet, and he joins on a free transfer. But
Ends up being
the first half of that season, he was our centre-half partnership with Colin Hendry. The second half of that season, as we know, it was Ian Pearce. Now, Ian Pearce was a kid from Chelsea, from the reserves, and I think he was a striker. And we bought him for, 300k? And put him at the back for the second half of that season. Robbie Slater, I'd never heard of Robbie Slater, no disrespect to him, but he came in and he did a great job. He fit that side, didn't he? And you're right, Batty was injured. Atkins came back in. He fit the side, and that was the genius of Dalglish. We had a couple of superstars, and then we had a lot of round pegs in round holes. And you're right, Anthony, we were absolutely deserving winners. I was at Anfield on that day, and I've watched it back, like we all have, so many times on video. And the gap between Redknapp scoring that free kick and the commentators saying it's over, we've won, and I'm getting goosebumps now talking about it. It's seconds, but in the stadium, I would have sworn it's minutes. It was horrendous. I just thought we'd blown it all at the end. But I mean, when is someone going to make a movie about this journey, the Jack Walker story, and culminating the title? Because it was just incredible, wasn't it? Incredible.
You talk about players contributing as well. You think about Gallagher, who's that all season with a broken leg. He comes back for one game, scores the winner against Palace, and then breaks his leg again, and he's out again.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
That in himself, he doesn't score that, we don't get the extra 2 points, we don't win the league. So it just shows the contribution of every person in that squad.
Absolutely.
Dalglish resigned after this title win. I imagine due to the pressure, but he did remain as a technical director, and he would be replaced by his assistant, Ray Harvard. In retrospect, was this the reference point of the descent?
Anybody would struggle to say that it wasn't. For me personally, looking back again, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but everything we did, I think, was built towards getting that title over the line. And you mentioned the European campaign that failed the season before, and why we didn't have cup success. I think the club was so focused on being the best club in the land and winning the title. It just felt like we got over the line. The last few weeks of that title season was difficult, wasn't it? And we just got over the line. And I just wonder that even if Dalglish was still in charge, whether we would have had a difficult season afterwards anyway. Who knows? But yeah, it's whether it's a coincidence or whether it isn't, it was definitely different afterwards. The momentum had gone a little bit. But
I think
I'm all right with that. We've got the title in the bag. I can die happy, man.
There's a few different stories that goes around, isn't there, really? There's the one where, obviously, Dalglish wanted a young Zidane and Dugarry and Lizarazu. And Jack Walker apparently said, look, no, you need to give the lads a chance that have already won the Premier League for you, i.e. Sherwood, things like that. And then there's also this thing about there was a bit of conflict around February, March time in the Championship season and get Daglish threatened to go on gardening leave and all this due to, I think, it was an incident over a few players or whatever. But there's so many different reasons as to why Daglish did step down, but might not necessarily mean pressure, but nobody knows, I don't think, and I don't think nobody will get to know.
We come to the 1995-96 season, and it's a poor title defense, though eventually Blackburn do somewhat better in the second half of the season and would finish seventh. But it's even a worse performance in the Champions League, marred by the fight between clubmates David Batty and Graham Lassalle in the match against Spartak Moscow. It must be said it was only really Alan Shearer who held his own once again, scoring another 30 plus goals in the season. You have the likes of Robbie Slater joining West Ham and actually being exchanged with Matty Holmes from West Ham. Mark Atkins joins Wolves. Lee McKell leaves the team, as does Tony Gale, who is always going to be a short-term signing. And ultimately, later in the season, David Batty joins Newcastle. And as far as the rivals, apart from Matty Holmes, you have the Northern Ireland midfielder Damian Johnson, Scottish midfielder Billy McKinlay from Dundee United. Later, you have the Norwegian Lars Bohinen from Nottingham Forest and young Aston Villa striker Graham Fenton, and also Welsh defender Chris Coleman later in the season. And towards the end, you have Gary Flitcroft from Manchester City. But all in all, it's a poor season after winning the title in the previous season. So I imagine, like you said, all the energy was spent to get over the line the previous season, and this season was kind of an anticlimax.
Yeah, it was. Again, I think you're right. I think the energy kind of went, and people might disagree. It's just something that's kind of occurred to me now thinking about it. But it feels a little bit like, regardless of what was going on behind the scenes, everything was geared up to trying to get to that title win. It almost feels like, as much as there was a really clear strategy and everybody knew what the plan was, and there was round pegs in round holes, after that title win, it was almost kind of what's next. And I don't think the strategy was clear. The other thing as well, you mentioned some of those players we brought in, and they weren't necessarily bad players, some of those players, but I don't know whether it was Dalglish's influence wasn't quite there, but he really was a genius in terms of the players that he chose. It wasn't about how much they costed with the right players. And you think of the likes of, Gary Flitcroft went on to have a good career at Rovers, and again, good player, Chris Coleman, etc. But there wasn't quite the same magic in those players that we bought before. We just seemed to have that kind of magic wand when it came to signings before, and it perhaps wasn't quite as good. I think Rovers fans always debate, why wasn't it as good afterwards? What happened? Was it the management? Was it Ray Harvard, Kenny Dalglish? I don't really know the answer to that. And if I'm really honest, I almost don't care too much. I'm just so happy that we got the title in the bag. And it would have been nice to have backed it up and won it again, but we won one. And like I said, I kind of try not to dwell too much on the negative side, really. That was enough for me. I would love more, but we won the league and that was great.
Just saying to Paul, what it'll happen again one day.
Oh, yeah. Long time off.
Yeah, you never know. Well, yeah.
I just think as well, I think with Ray Harford coming in as well, he's established as one of the best coaches in football. But, it's the same as like the Brian Kidd thing. He might be an hell of a coach, but you got it's being a manager is totally different. And I think that obviously Ray struggled with that side of things with managing a team. I think the philosophy we're trying the same, replacing players with younger players, and but obviously, like you said, Dalglish got the right players in the right positions for the right price. And I don't think Harford had the same pulling power as Dalglish either. Although we were champions of England, I still don't think that Harford had the same pulling power as Dalglish had.
And fine margins as well, isn't it? In the end, I think we finished seventh, didn't we? We weren't a million miles off being in the top of 3 or 4. Although obviously, you only have to finish 5th or 6th now. I don't need to be termed success because you get into Europe and it's a money spinner. But it's fine margins. Every team in the league is spending money and trying to compete and be successful. And it's just those fine margins that we perhaps just missed out on. With a bit of different luck or a couple of different results, we could have quite easily finished in the top couple of teams in the table. But
was that not the year of the Bosman ruling as well? Come in, sure it did that year.
I think it was. I don't know how much.
Well, the ruling was like December 95 or January 96, but it effectively came in the system in the following season, 1996-97 season. That was like the official first season of the Bozeman. Yeah.
With the Premier League becoming such a big success in the early and mid 90s, like you had Serie A, that was the main league in Europe, weren't it? But now the Premier League was catching it up, and we were starting to, when I say we, I mean the Premier League in England was starting to see big names coming across to us by 95, 96. And you've got the strategy that Jack Walker had in place to spend money, to invest, to take risks. That was starting to become more prevalent with other clubs as well. So people were trying to copycat almost. So you started to see the likes of Chelsea splashing out on foreign talent and what have you, and spending bigger on players. And we didn't really, did we? I think even if you look back to the summer of 94 before we won the league, yes, we bought Chris Sutton for a lot of money, British record transfer fee. So it might sound a bit daft, but aside from that summer, we didn't make loads of signings. And then we've got in the summer of the pre-season for 95, 96, the signings that we made then weren't brilliant either. But other clubs were catching up with us. Other clubs were copying what we'd done. And of course, United had signed Andy Cole mid-season 94, 95. So other clubs were strengthening. We'd lost our manager, a big catalyst in our success. The spark seemed to have gone out a little bit. And yeah, our signings weren't fantastic either, to be fair. Like you say, Gary Flitcroft, good servant to the club, good player, loved him. But he's not going to win you a league, is he? I think we can accept that. Matty Holmes, he wasn't going to win us a league. Easy to say with hindsight, but at the time, I think I certainly felt it, that these players weren't particularly going to win us a league. I mean, you hope they might do that. You hope that something might come out of them. Chris Coleman, another one. You hope he's going to be a leading centre-half in the Premier League and a big international and turn a corner. But I think we all felt that deep down he wasn't going to. So
they weren't bad players, were they? But the Midas touch had gone. Anyone we signed prior to that, I mean, all right, we have some flops in the market, but generally we bought people and they were absolutely the right player, weren't they? And they just dropped into that team and they were perfect. And it just got harder and harder. I mean, the game changed. I think it goes back to Jack Walker's genius. You know, the timing was key as well. If Jack Walker had come along 2 or 3 years later, this wouldn't have happened. I think he recognised that the Premier League was a game changer. He's a businessman. He was successfully spotted the opportunity, the money in the game, etc. But things moved on. If you look at the size of the stadiums in 1995 compared to now, our stadium wasn't one of the smallest around. It was probably sort of halfway up the list. But the game sort of changed on an industrial level. The money got bigger. The players started coming from abroad. The finances were different, and like I said, the timing was everything for what we did.
At the end of that season, in the summer of 1996, Alan Shearer returned to his home and signed for Kevin Keegan's Newcastle United in a world record signing. Was this the one player that they could never replace?
Well, we're still trying today, aren't we?
We'll try.
We haven't replaced him yet. It's 30, it's still 30 years and we still haven't got anywhere near it. I don't think you can replace Alan Shearer.
No club could.
No.
You might look at Harry Kane's goal record and say maybe Harry Kane's up there with him, but I personally don't think that. I think his numbers aren't far off Alan Shearer's, but I don't think we'll see another one.
Yeah, when you sat there and watched Shearer week in, week out, like we all did at the game, there's nobody being like him. He was absolutely unplayable. He was an absolute machine, especially when he was at Rovers. I mean, he had a great career, obviously, and look at after he left, I don't think he was ever as good as he was when he was at Ewood. I mean, he's the record Premier League goal scorer, but a huge amount of those goals, a huge percentage of those goals came in 4 years at Rovers. In fact, 3.5 years because he missed half a season. He was possibly one of the top 2 or 3 players in the world for me at the time. You probably have Brazilian Ronaldo and a few others coming to fall like Zidane in later years, but Shearer was absolutely incredible.
His record goal scorer, but the lad had 2 cruciate ligament injuries as well, and he's still up there. It just shows how good he were. Even after his injuries, he come back bigger and stronger. And
I always, one thing that always sticks out for me, you've always got games and goals that just live in your memory.
Yeah.
Remember him coming back away at Newcastle, oddly, and you've got Tim Sherwood just plays this beautiful ball through, dinks it over the top. Shearer runs onto it, power and pace, classic finish, bang in his back. and the way he just wheels away and after he scored. I mean, yeah.
We've
Stuff like that. It's like it's etched in your brain, isn't it?
Yeah, we missed
that. Not many people come back from things like that. Shearer did it twice.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, you can't replace a bloke like that.
He's unreplaceable.
Well, let's look at the 1996-97 season, the first Bozeman year, and the decline of the team continues, where they would finish in eventual 13th place with only 9 wins during the season. Ray Harford would be replaced by Tony Parks in October. Apart from Alan Shearer, you have the likes of Bobby Mims, Mike Newell leaving the club as well. The only significant signings are Greek player Georgios Donis from Panathinaikos, and midway through the season, you have the Danish striker Per Pedersen. And this is around the time where, like you said, all these other teams, Manchester United, Chelsea, and others are spending heavily on stars like Vialli, just to name one. So you have all these stars coming in, and obviously you see Blackburn is not spending that kind of cash. And of course, the team finished 13th, and it looks like the writing's on the wall at this point.
So I think that season, this is where we have to give a massive shout out to Tony Parks, because without him coming in as caretaker manager and getting the results that he did when he were caretaker manager, we could have been in trouble that season. But Tony Parks is just like, obviously, if you're aware of him, he's just Blackburn through and through, and he's a legend in our Blackburn's eyes. He's come in and saved us so many times when we was in a raid, really, and he did it that season. I think it was his first game. I think it was Liverpool at home, I think.
Yeah.
And we ended up winning it.
Did we win it 3-0?
3-0, I think it was 3-0.
We did.
I think it was, yeah.
And then he also picked up a few results after that. And I think without Tony coming in and doing what he did, building the place back up, because kind of like, it was down and there was no confidence in the place and in the squad. And I think Tony built the squad back up to finish that season. And we finished in 13th. So without Tony, I think it could have been a different story that season.
Yeah, there was still a hangover, wasn't there? It did rock the club when he went.
Yeah.
That season, obviously, we've seen another, I hate to say lack of investment because it sounds like a criticism against Jack Walker, but I think maybe he's lost a bit of confidence in Ray Harford. Maybe his priorities have changed. Who knows what it is? But we weren't competing with the other sides in the Premier League. Bergkamp had gone to Arsenal. Now, rewind 3 years, we'd have been in the hunt for players of that calibre. We'd have been mentioned for signing players like that, but we're not anymore. We're signing Georgie Donis. I used to love Donis. Rapid, real quick winger.
The train.
Absolutely. I just love watching him. But again, he was never going to be the kind of player that's going to get you even into sort of the top 3, top 4, something like that. Is even if that's your marquee summer signing, something's not going, especially when you've just let Shearer go. So yeah, like you say, the writing's on the wall at that point, I think, unfortunately. But still, like, we still had some great nights during these seasons, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Like, I remember Newcastle at home. I might be getting the season wrong here. That might have been 97, 98. But Fenton, when he goes through, we were 1-0 down and we turned it round 2-1 up. Fenton's gone through.
I think it was 95, 96. I'm pretty sure
Was that 95, 96?
Yeah.
I think so. I think Shearer set him up for them.
Like that. I mean, such good times. Even when we were on a decline, it wasn't all bad.
No, definitely not. We had a couple of campaigns in Europe which obviously weren't great, but we had decent finishes.
Yeah.
You remember the Sheffield Wednesday 7-2 game, the Forest 7-0. We had some really good games, didn't we?
Yeah.
It just never quite hit those heights, did it? Before, which was almost impossible.
I think it was consistency that we never hit, did we? It was always up and down, weren't we?
Yeah, there are a few things. Like I say, I think the game did change. I think, again, thinking about it just now, we're talking about it, I think when the Division 1 became the Premier League, it's almost like a lot of the clubs that were already there, already established, caught a bit of a cold. We came along and really rocked the boat, didn't we? And I think everyone woke up. It took them a couple of years to wake up. Again, the stadiums got bigger, the Sky money got bigger, football changed. Euro 96 was a change in terms of players coming to this country, etc. And Chelsea could attract players to London that probably wouldn't have come to the Northwest, as an example. The game changed. And like I say, we were just lucky that what we did at the right time.
I think that's when football became a business and not a sport, didn't it, really?
Yeah. Yeah. We again, timing was everything. We just caught the tail end of the old game, really. And like I say, people could throw money at it all they like. It doesn't guarantee anything.
There's plenty of clubs that
Especially
have
not
thrown a
now.
hell of a lot of money at it and got nothing, isn't there? So
Lots. It doesn't get talked about enough. But I even remember the promotion season in '92. Derby County had money, didn't they, and splashed it around as well. There wasn't just us. And then in the Premier League years, it's the most boring story ever about how we bought the title, and it's a combination of jealousy and laziness for me. But Everton, Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester United, Spurs, we're all spending big money. We just spent it right. We had a Shearer, Flowers, and Sutton, and possibly David Batter with the headline signings. But then you've got Tony Gale, Ian Pearce, Graham Russo, Henningberg, relatively unknown players or very low fees. We just got it right. Like I say, it was an absolute fairy tale.
It's around these seasons in the late 90s as well, isn't it, where we start seeing Damien Duff coming through, Johnson, Brooms, Dunny.
Yeah,
you start seeing all these guys coming through. So again, good times. There's some real good players there. Used to love watching Damien Duff play.
He's one of the best in the world.
So while there was a bit of a decline going on, it was still fantastic to be a Rovers fan.
See, I don't even think that's talked about much about Jack Walker. He built the academy as well, and everyone talks about all these signings, but we did have a vision for the future, i.e. with Duff and
He was a visionary, wasn't he? He was ahead of his time and at the right time. He really was. And like he was a decline, but it was a relative decline. Realistically, there's only one way to go after that title win. I mean, we could have gone on, conquered Europe, won title after title, and that would have been great, but it wasn't to be. So, it was a decline in the sense that, we'd hit the absolute peak, hadn't we? We were still a small town club punching above a weight, whichever way you look at it, money or not. So, lots of good times still. No regrets whatsoever. I'll die a happy man with that league title in the bag.
For the 1997-98 season, there's a new manager, Roy Hodgson. The team does surprisingly better, and they finish sixth and just make it to the UEFA Cup. You have a clear out of some players like Paul Warhurst, young goalkeeper Shay Given joins Newcastle, Graham Fenton joins Leicester, Henningberg joins Man United, Matty Holmes joins Charlton Athletic, Nicky Marker leaves the club, Graham Lasso rejoins Chelsea, Ian Pearce joins West Ham, Per Pedersen goes to Borussia Mönchengladbach. Later in the season, Chris Coleman, Georgios Donis, Damian Johnson, and Lars Bohinen leave the club. So wholesale team changes. The arrivals include French defender Patrick Valéry from Bastia, Norwegian defender Tor Pedersen from St. Pauli, Swiss defender Stefan Henschels from Hamburg, Swedish striker Martin Dahlin from Borussia Mönchengladbach, another Swedish player Anders Andersson from Malmo, and later in the season you have the Scottish defender Callum Davidson arriving from St. Johnstone. So there's improvement, which I imagine was unexpected, but still, this is not the same Blackburn of a few years before.
No, well, before Hodgson came in, Sven-Goran Eriksson had agreed to be Blackburn manager. So all us Rovers fans was quite excited as prospect of Eriksson coming in, and then all of a sudden he turned us down and Roy Hodgson took the helm. Hodgson being a very experienced manager with Inter Milan and obviously with national.
He joined Lazio.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. This was the start of a new era, wasn't it, really, for Rovers? This is the line between the Dalglish years and what we had before. And then I think, again, the game had evolved. And although Hodgson was an Englishman, he was very much a European coach, wasn't he? And the players we brought in were more of this new phase of the game, and that we were seeing. So players from the continent, and I mean, he hit the ground running, didn't he? Really, we had a great start when he came in, and again, it was probably that kind of. He was very big on fitness and different kinds of training methods, etc. It just kind of went sour and ran out of steam a little bit. But I remember early on, the Wednesday game before, did we go 5-1 up in 20 odd minutes? Played some good stuff under him, and we were right at the top of the league. Just on the players as well. I mean, some of those players kind of the names weren't really that big a deal in terms of the history of Rovers, but one that always really upset me was Shay Given going, because again, at the time we had Tim Flowers and Given wasn't probably quite ready. But I think for the sake of another couple of years, we probably could have had a really good keeper for a long, long time. So I was a bit gutted when I saw Shay Given have a career with Newcastle. But then, we got Brad Friedel, didn't we, a couple of years after that. So
We talked about marquee signings before, you know, and other clubs buying big players. At the World Cup '94, Martin Darling was absolutely massive for Sweden. But I remember when he signed for Blackburn, and like me personally, I was like, really excited. Like, you know, he came from Roma, and he ended up being one of the biggest disappointments, I think. It was
Started
just,
well, didn't he? But again, he just tailed off. Stefan Onshaw was a good signing. He was a good player.
yeah.
Cultured centre half, wasn't he? These are different players, weren't they, to what Dalglish was signing? It was a different strategy completely for the club.
John Filan coming that season as well, don't forget. And he
He was a
started off,
very good
it
keeper.
was unreal, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah, he was excellent. Yeah. But, you know, we finished sixth, didn't we? I think it was that Sutton free kick against Newcastle on the last game of the season that put us in
Last
Europe.
couple of minutes, weren't it? Yeah. Into Europe with it.
Yeah.
We come to the end of the decade
Lost.
and ultimate relegation in this 1998-99 season, where Brian Kidd is in charge from December after replacing Roy Hodgson. As far as Europe, Blackburn Rovers are eliminated in the first round to French side Olympique Lyonnais. You have departures of players like Patrick Valery after one season. He goes back to France to Bastia. Stuart Ripley joins Southampton. Tor Pedersen also leaves after a season, joining Eintracht Frankfurt. Colin Henry, one of the emblematic players of this era, he joins Rangers in Scotland. James Beattie, who was about to break through, he's exchanged with Kevin Davies from Southampton. Anders Anderson leaves the club as well. And later in the season, Tim Sherwood, he joins Tottenham. As far as the arrivals, you have Darren Peacock from Newcastle. I mentioned Kevin Davies. You have the French defender Sebastien Perez from Bastia. Scottish defender Christian Daly from Derby County. Later, you have the Italian player Dario Marcolin from Lazio. Welsh striker Nathan Blake from Bolton Wanderers. Northern Irish international Keith Gillespie arrived from Newcastle. Ashley Ward arrived from Barnsley. In the new year, Matt Jansen arrived from Crystal Palace. Jason McAteer arrived from Liverpool. And Lee Carsley, the Irish midfielder, arrived from Derby County. But it was too little too late as Blackburn Rovers were relegated and an era was over.
Yeah. I think the worst bit for me in all that was seeing Colin Hendry leaving and Tim Sherwood leaving. You're starting to see the last few players from our peak starting to leave, and that was a tough time. And the European the start of the season, you're thinking you've got that hope and anticipation. You're back in Europe, and then you're going out in the first round. Remember that night at Ewood? Always sticks in memory. Another one. You've got the lad for Leon called Bak.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I'm sat right behind it in Blackburn End, and he scored in the Darwin end, and he scored from about 30 yards. Or it seemed like that at the time. He's just smashed it, and you think, and it's just one disappointment after another at this stage. And I think the signings we were making looked like bottom half of the league. I think,
yeah, the strategy's gone then, hasn't it?
Like Ashley Ward and Lee Carsley. I never speak bad about these players. I did used to enjoy watching them some of the times, but I just felt that we started to look like a bottom half of the table side, and the signings we were making out reflected that. But signing Nathan Blake, again, he's not going to get you back into the top half of the table, is he? But you can't dog these lads off. He gave us that goal away at Anfield. I remember being at Anfield in the FA Cup one night, and he scores a last-minute winner. So I love Nathan Blake for that. But
also, Tony Park's in charge there as well.
Signings, thinking, look, is that it? Is that all we're doing this year? And yeah, bad season.
That was the year that we went down, that wasn't it? Liverpool away. That was the year that we went down, weren't it?
No, that was
we were down then.
We were in
the first division side.
We were in the championship, so to speak.
Yeah. Tony Park's in charge. His kid had been sacked.
Yeah. I remember driving to Anfield. I'm on at team supporters coaches. We never really used to get the coaches to away games, but we did for that midweek one. And we were driving towards Anfield, and loads of kids are chucking stones and bricks at the side of our team, our supporters bus window and that. And you're going in there thinking, right, we're going to get a good hiding before we get into the ground. We're going to get a good hiding on the pitch, and we won 1-0. I remember getting picked up by a steward. I'd run down the front and all that. All that stuff when I had a little bit more energy in me. I'd run down the front when Nathan Blake scored. Stewart picks me up, and Blake stood right in front of me with his top off. And yeah, magic. But 98-99 season was dreadful. I feel like it's the Forest game at Ewood. We lose it. We should be winning those kinds of games. Lost it.
Down, weren't
and
they? I think at that point.
Yeah.
I think that's when it felt to me. We didn't go down until the second to last game, did we? We drew with United, which was a little bit of a
we also were
thing.
Was we also
when we
went up
went
against
up
Southampton?
Forest at home, it was a bit. That's when I kind of felt, hang on, this is going against us now.
Paddy Davis was a big disappointment for me that season. I know you talk about not knocking players, but he came in for what was relatively big money at the time, and obviously letting James Beattie go the opposite direction, homegrown, localish lad. He went on to have a good career at Southampton, didn't he? And then Kevin Davis came to us and never felt like he really kind of fully applied himself. And then obviously went on to have a good career at Bolton's. That was tough. I don't think he scored for the first 3 or 4 months, did he? And he just never looked quite interested.
Was we 3-1 up against Southampton towards the end of the season as well, and blew that and went to 3-3? I got a feeling that was...
I remember it.
Looking at it, Blackburn were relegated just 4 years after winning a league title. Was that just because of the double loss of Dalglish and Shearer, or was it Jack Walker maybe taking his foot off the pedal in the transfer market?
They're all relevant. I don't think there's ever one reason for something like that happening. Things you mentioned are definitely relevant. Any club would suffer from the vacuum left by a player like Shearer going because he is irreplaceable, as we've said. Again, the magic and the genius that Kenny Dalglish brought to the club. Again, probably left a bit of a vacuum and a hard act to follow. Jack was probably getting older. Again, perhaps the game had moved on a little bit. I keep using the word genius, but he did the right things at the right time. But the game did move on, and perhaps he just lost that momentum as well. So, and then bad transfer decisions. The magic of the players we brought in. This Midas touch we had. We bought players in the early 90s, and they were just right, and they hit the jackpot every time. It got harder, and we just evolved in the wrong direction year by year, and it was disappointing to drop. But again, I have no regrets about where we got to before we did.
Do you think the Bozeman ruling made Jack Walker's fortune somewhat not as significant compared to the other teams at this point?
Not just that, but I think it played a big part. The money in the game just changed, didn't it? And that was part of it.
I don't think it did. I mean, and look, while you've got to buy good players to be successful, but it's not all about Jack Walker's money here. Without it, we wouldn't have been able to sign those players that we did. But what we had there was a businessman that was looking at things logically, wants to make his hometown club successful again, and he did. And he bought these players and sold them at profits. It's not like we've got this net spend of minus £100 million every summer. He's sold them at profits. I've never actually crunched the numbers on it, and I'm sure if you did, you could look at it and say it probably didn't cost much money to. So many people say buy the title. We didn't buy the title. It was a strategy. It was logical. It was executed with perfection. We didn't buy no title. We did it sustainably. You could do it again and again and again, and it keeps sustaining itself. It was clever, and it was done well. It was done right. So no, I don't think the Bosman ruling changed anything for us. I think Jack Walker was becoming ill, weren't he?
Yeah.
In the late 90s. So did his priorities change? Who knows what's happened? But
Possibly lost a bit of his energy, didn't he? And his influence. And I've always said, he was a 12th man for me. He was such a talisman for that club, behind the scenes. And I think, there's that as well.
Like you said, 80% of the players that were brought on in the early 90s went for a profit. So, like you say, I couldn't agree more. We didn't buy the title. It was a business model, and it succeeded.
As I said before, it's the most frustrating, lazy, and boring thing that's aimed at us, isn't it? But you look at that team without getting into too much detail. But there's half the side that played in Division 2 with us there. Your Atkins, your Hendrys, Wilcoxes, Sherwoods. We evolved the side over years. We probably played a little bit of catch up because the sides we were competing with have been throwing money at it for years. But we weren't the biggest spenders. All right, we probably paid some decent wages, etc. But we built a side. It's so different to what goes on now. And one of you guys mentioned David Batty before he got injured. We didn't just go and buy another David Batty at 4, 5, 6 million quid. Mark Atkins stepped up, and the coaching and the management of that team was so good that everyone had a job, and it just worked so well. It allowed us to bring in the right players that weren't necessarily household names.
Absolutely.
So listening to you guys, it's not a story about money buying success, but is it more of a story of a romanticism of a small team winning, as well as a cautionary tale of lessons in maintaining the success? Otherwise, you will stagnate.
There's only one story for me. There's, you mentioned three things there. Which one is it? It's all about the romantic story. Money. You need money for success in 99.9% of cases. But as we've said, there's a lot of clubs spent a lot of money and had none. We had that success, and not quite at the scale that was beyond everyone else's spending that people like to make out. The cautionary tale about maintaining it. Again, hindsight's a wonderful thing. How do you maintain that? You keep throwing cash at players. And for me, it's all the romance. That's the real story here. And again, I don't focus too much on what went wrong. Let's have a look at what went right. And I've said it before, but somebody needs to make a movie of this story. Jack Walker coming along, the rise from the second division in the league, in the dramatic way we did. That's the story here. That's the takeaway memory for me.
And for me, I also think, without Mike Newell's goal at Wembley against Leicester, we don't see Shearer. We don't win the Premier League.
Yeah.
For me,
History-changing moment.
Absolutely.
Sliding doors. What about Zidane not coming in '95? Another sliding door, isn't it?
That was why
Who knows where we could have gone to?
That's where Daglish went for me.
We could. You are really right. And I think the only thing I'll caveat that with is that every club will have sliding door moments, yeah, but at least we've got you go to Eagle Park, there's a replica of the Premier League trophy up there, and not many clubs have that. So, Newcastle had a sliding door moment, didn't they, the year after, where they blew it and they probably should have won the league and threw it away. Liverpool, years later, Gerrard's slip, etc. So there are always sliding door moments, and like I say, hindsight's a wonderful thing. We could have had Zidane, we could have, taken the league by storm and been talking now about which is our favourite of our 5 Premier League titles, maybe, but it wasn't to be. But I keep saying, we've got one in the bag, and that's all that matters to me.
At least we've, been able to witness that, and that's something I'll never forget.
As we always say to, lesser clubs and other clubs and jealous fans, we've seen things they'll never see, and that's true. That we punch above weight in terms of success and trophies.
Can I ask a question, Shahan?
Go ahead.
How do you think it shaped you as a person seeing Rovers doing what we did? This is a question to Joni and Paul. Do you feel like it shaped you as a person seeing Rovers do what we did from in the early to mid 90s, all the way through the 90s?
Absolutely, mate. For me, I think it's pretty one point you don't give up on your dreams, do you? Because dreams do come true. It definitely come true for us in '95. And
I'm not just shaping me as a person, but every single person, every single Rovers fan, every person that's lived up in Blackburn or fans around the world, it's a pivotal part of their life, whether I'll be a different person or not as a result of it happening or not happening. I dread to think if we'd have blown it on that final day at Anfield and never won it, and then subsequently never got on to win it, like Newcastle, for example, probably life would be a little bit different, wouldn't it? I mean, it's one of those things, you look at your life and there's highs and lows in life, isn't there? We all go through that, that's life. But you can look back at that day in 1995 and think, for a while, we were the best team in the country. We were the happiest set of fans. We hit the highs. Yeah, I wouldn't like to think of my life without that. I mean, what about yourself, Anthony?
I think it just gave me a faith, a belief that you can do anything. I genuinely do. I think it shaped me as a person. I credit a lot of good things that have happened to me in life to the Rovers, and I genuinely think that it's give me a self-belief. Jack Walker, self-made man, all that stuff. Rovers, small town club, coming up 4th, 2nd, 1st. You can do it. And I genuinely think that it shaped me as a person 100%.
Doesn't it? And if you look at the history of the town as well, I mean, the 90s, I don't know, I don't think it's a coincidence that period of time was a bit of a boom town for the town as well. The nightlife and, jobs and how things were in Blackburn. And, again, you look at the flip side of that, the last 15 years have been tough, and it feels like the town's been on decline. You know, the town and the team, the fortune of the town and the team are absolutely interlinked, which is why it's so important. Well, I mean, how different do we all feel as a result of Friday night after that great win? It just gives the place a bounce. The pubs are busy. People are spending, socialising, talking about football for the right reasons. It does. You're right. It does make a huge difference to us.
You know what? And you've got your Dalglishes, your Newells, your Shearers, Artiet boy, what it's all about. And
I would like to thank all of you for sharing your memories of Blackburn Rovers in the 1990s. All our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. Thank
keep having
you
it.
once again, and hope to continue these discussions on football history.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great to talk. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Carry on doing what you're doing, Shehan. Really good channel. See you
Thank you.
later.
Yeah,
Appreciate
nice
it.
one. Cheers, Sham.
Take care.
See you later.
Thank you. Bye. See you later.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Paul.
Ta-ra.